Us? Oh, you. Are you going to together? Yeah, let's hope. They're pretty good about, so I hope so. Yeah, we should. I can't believe we've never met.
Afternoon. My name is Maureen Kenny, and I'm the Dean at the Lynch School, and I am delighted to welcome all of you here this afternoon for States of Success. This is just where Boston College and the Lynch School like to be, is at the intersection of policy, practice, and current events. So we are very, very delighted this afternoon to have 3 educational leaders that have done a tremendous amount to advance education across the states in New England. I am also very, very grateful to the wonderful Lynch School faculty, Andy Hargreaves, Mariella Paez, and Henry Brown, who have helped to organize this event and make it possible. Also, Kendra Butters, a number of doctoral students in the Tespecki department, as well as Christy Thayer, who works with us. So thanks to all who worked to organize this event and to make it possible for us to have this great dialogue this afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you very much indeed. Well, welcome everybody this evening on the first Monday after Thanksgiving. And we know that that is a stretch for some people, especially those who have to come a long way. So we really appreciate your participation, and we especially appreciate 3 great system leaders of 3 great systems joining us this evening in alphabetical order.
Andy, are you on?
So am I on? I have no idea. Yeah.
Try now.
Yeah. How does that sound now? Absolutely no different at all. Yeah. Even
It's for the video. Let's try again.
Good.
There.
Okay, good. How does that sound now? All right, shall I try this again for the video so you can edit it? Which is, welcome everybody. People I know have come back a long way from Thanksgiving to be here at this event, and especially to 3 great leaders of 3 great systems. In alphabetical order. If we can remember this, you'll get formal introductions soon, but from Massachusetts, Secretary Matt Malone, from New Hampshire, Commissioner Virginia Barry, and from Vermont, Secretary Rebecca Holcombe. So this is a really great opportunity because at Boston College and in the Lynch School, we truly do support efforts to connect research, theory, and practice, and policy in all our professional schools, and particularly in this case in the Lynch School. And we have with us here this evening 3 people who embody that, because they've done it all. They've been practitioners in education, they've been in the classroom, they've been in the leader's office, they've undertaken and led research. So we have 3 people who represent all of that and are here to engage us in those kinds of conversations across those boundaries. So that's enormously helpful and greatly valuable. Whenever we strive to become better, one of the things we do is we look at, or in today's jargon, we benchmark ourselves against other people's performance who are in some ways ahead of us. Internationally in education, we do things like look to the west, to Finland. We look to the east, to jurisdictions in Asia. We look to the north, except in winter, to Canada. And we look at what they say to us, what they have to offer, what they do differently to reach greater heights of achievement, to reduce social inequities, and to promote all children's well-being. Though we can't copy any of these countries, we can learn a lot by looking at other high performers as well as ourselves and figure out how we can stretch ourselves even further. But on multiple indicators, what's a little less in the news is it also has to be said that despite all the weeping and wailing about America's mediocre performance compared to other countries on international tests such as PISA and TIMSS, that actually within the US, a number of states hold up extremely well in relation to international high performers and are also ahead of most other states in the US. The nation's highest performing states are often New England states, and 3 of them are with us this evening. You've led the way on kids count indicators of child well-being. The 3 top states are all sitting right here. You're all in the top 5, and usually the top 3 in the annual National Assessment of Educational Progress, known for short as the NAEP. And all are consistent high performers on the International Maths and Science Studies, in which Boston College, of course, plays a very strong key role. Yet there are differences when we look at these consistent high performers in their states of success. There are differences between the states as well. We know there are differences between high-performing countries. Singapore is not like Canada, is not like Finland, and yet they all perform well. So what are the differences between these states that we can talk about this evening? Some are differences of performance. States do vary in terms of their records in equity and in achievement gaps, for example, and we'll probably have chance to talk about those this evening. Some are differences of strategy in relation to approaches to such things as charter schools, testing, and early childhood provision. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that. And then there are differences we all know of policy, culture, and geography that are as plain as the mottos on the state's license plates. So tonight's discussion addresses 2 intriguing questions. What do these 3 high-performing states have in common that explains their existing success, despite all these other differences? And as prominent, though not perfect performers, what are the key areas where each of them still needs to improve? And what do their neighboring states do or have to offer that could help each state do better? Teachers get better when they work with and learn from other teachers. Schools get better when they learn from other schools. And perhaps tonight we might learn a bit about how states can get even better by learning about and working with each other. Now my colleague Henry Brown, having tantalized you with this teasing introduction to the similarities and differences, will introduce the main characters who will figure in the grand drama of this evening.
Well, thank you, Andy, and welcome again to everyone, and especially to our panelists. I'm going to introduce 2 of our speakers, beginning with the speaker who's traveled the furthest. Rebecca Holcombe, on my right, is Secretary of the Agency of Education in the state of Vermont. She joined that agency in January of this year. She holds a BA in History from Brown, an MBA from Simmons, and a Master's of Education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She's taught at the middle school, high school, and university levels, and most recently she headed Dartmouth College's teacher education program. Secretary Holcombe has conducted research in a wide range of areas, including organizational learning, principal development, and school leadership, as well as high-stakes testing. So we're delighted to welcome you, Secretary Holcombe, to BC. Our second most distant panelist is Virginia Barry, who is Commissioner of Education in the state of New Hampshire, a position she has held since 2009. and she received her bachelor's at Florida State University, a master's in science from Queens College, CUNY, and a PhD from Florida State. She has more than 30 years of experience as a teacher, tenured professor, and high-level university administrator at the University of New Hampshire. Commissioner Barry is nationally recognized as an innovative, successful education leader who has helped New Hampshire move forward on a number of educational indicators, and we're delighted to welcome her to Boston College.
Right. Welcome, everyone. I have the pleasure of presenting Matt Malone. Secretary Malone directs the Executive Office of Education, which is responsible for early education, K-12, and higher education in Massachusetts. Secretary Malone sits on the board of the Commonwealth Education Agencies. So he sits on the board of the Department of Early Education and Care, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Department of Higher Education, as well as the University of Massachusetts system. He's the governor's top advisor on education and helps shape the Commonwealth's continuous education reform agenda. Prior to his appointment, Secretary Malone was a superintendent of Brockton's public schools, and before that at the Swampscott's public schools. He also has worked as a leader in the San Diego City School District, supervising and evaluating 26 school principals serving 14,000 students. And Secretary Malone actually began his career as a teacher, an assistant principal, a headmaster. He is a graduate of the Lynch School of Education, where he obtained a master's in education and a PhD, and we're delighted to have you here with us today. Thank you. As far as format, what we like to do is start the forum with brief remarks. So each panelist is going to have a 5 minutes of presentation, and we ask the secretaries and the commissioner to think about what does their state do well and what does the state need to do next in terms of their education. So we're going to hear from the remarks, and then the panelists are going to take questions, and then we'll have time for audience questions. So now we'll start with the remarks, and our first presenter will be Secretary Malone.
Thank you. It's an honor and privilege to be here today. Every time Professor Hargreaves talks, I close my eyes and think I'm listening to Mick Jagger. Honor being in the room. I heard he dances like Mick Jagger, too. I've heard that recently. Got the moves like Jagger,
Moves
Professor.
like Jagger.
So, listen, I think
That's you.
yeah.
That's you.
Looking around the room, I see a lot of familiar faces there, too. I see Joe Padula's here, which is great to see you. And we got Fran Loftus also here, old friends of mine from the, not old friends, but friends of mine from the school. So it's a privilege to see you all. In Massachusetts, for us, it's really been about a winning strategy. And the winning strategy is one designed around three critical investments: education, innovation, and infrastructure. And those three core commitments of our governor have essentially been our core values, if you will, over the last 8 years of the Patrick administration. I think that if you say, what are we doing well or why are we doing it well, it's really about collaboration and alignment. And when we talk about collaboration, we're talking about public, private, we're talking about charter, district, we're talking about labor associations with outside advocacy groups, people working together all around a focus to close gaps. And those gaps that we're looking to close are achievement gaps and economic opportunity gaps. When I talk about alignment, I talk about how we've been successful in looking at results on national and international assessments in 8th and 10th graders, not because we're focused on 8th and 10th grade, but we're focused on an aligned system. So our investments in early childhood lead to those results that we see in 8th and 10th grade, that our investments in higher ed lead to the types of teachers that are allowing those results to happen. So when we talk about the work of aligning a strategy or a theory of action, it's really around ensuring that the Secretary's office makes sure that essentially our four agencies, early childhood, K-12, higher ed, and UMass, are all focused specifically on opening doors and closing gaps. And it looks very differently across the different agencies, but I would say to you that the hard part of the work over the last 8 years in the Commonwealth is to ensure that everyone is pulling in the same direction and not getting caught in their silos, which quite often happens in education. We've been fortunate that this administration has not allowed that to happen, and I think that is one of the core reasons why Massachusetts is done so well. Our secretariat is the newest in state government. We're the youngest secretariat, and also when you think about education in the Commonwealth, there was no such thing as a Department of Early Education and Care just a few short years ago. So you think about the changes that have been able to happen within Governor Patrick's leadership, and also the Achievement Gap Act of 2010, which is the first major legislation since the Ed Reform Act of 1993. I don't want to get into specifics and argue about how great we do on standardized assessments, because we do. And we're leading the nation, and that's great. But to me, that's not the big game changer. What the big game changer is for me is that we're building good human beings here in Massachusetts. And we're doing that through work in the classroom between students and teachers that it will make your eyes water when you see the work that we do with kids every day in the Commonwealth. And my role and the way I see my job is not to sit on Beacon Hill and talk about policy. It's to be out in the field engaging with the people who are the end result of where the rubber hits the road. The teachers, the students, school committees, parents, and administrators in our systems. So we are out 3 days a week visiting classrooms, understanding what the touch points are, understanding where good policy turns into bad implementation, understanding what's onerous, understanding what's good work that we need to sustain, thinking about things that where the work isn't so good and figuring out how we can adjust it, and having a lot of fun at the same time. You know, I could sit here and talk to you right now for the next hour about workforce development, and you'd be like, what the heck is he talking about? He's a Secretary of Education. But workforce development is integral to the work that I do. It's a core piece of the work that I do in education. I mean, this whole investment about opening doors and creating opportunities is really the dual mission work of academia and workforce development. They're coupled. They're not two separate things, and all too often we think of them as separate things, but they are fully integrated. That's why the Cristo Rey schools are so successful. That's why the Big Picture Learning Company is the coolest thing happening in the country. I think hopefully we can talk today. I'll say a couple of controversial things. I'll start in my comments, I guess, maybe if I could. I think we assess too much. I think summative assessment's gone wild in Massachusetts. And I'm the Secretary of Education. I think we need to find a balance. I think we've gone over the edge. We've jumped the shark on too much of something that I think we need to have a real policy discussion about what is perhaps less is more. I mean, we've got kids alone, we've got third graders worried about what they're going to benchmark themselves against. It's kind of sounds a little crazy when you think about it, right? But that's the reality of where we are. I'll also say to you that if we aren't involving our teachers in this work, we're wasting everyone's time, because they are our core partners and have to be at the table setting the direction and helping shape the policy as we move forward. I give our governor a lot of credit. Everything that we've done over the last 8 years has had our two major labor unions at the table. And now I got the book.
That's great. Thank you so much for your opening remarks. Commissioner Barry, you're next.
Great, thank you. And it is a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it. So I think one way that I like to describe New Hampshire is just sort of set a context for New Hampshire, because we are all very different in our demographics. So New Hampshire has 220, just barely 220,000 students. We are considered the third most aging state in the country, fourth in economic income. It's a very interesting environment right now. We have declining enrollments like many rural states. Sort of half of our state is rural and the other half is a little bit more suburban. We have 3 small cities. But I think one interesting element of reform efforts is our government structure. We have 144 legislators, and they are voted in every 2 years. So when we talk about policy and we talk about reform efforts, it's a very, very complex environment to be able to move reform forward, because it's very intensely political. So we have, sort of a lot of splits going on right now. So I've been commissioner for the last 6 years, and I had the pleasure of starting the week that Race to the Top came out. And so for everyone in this room that remembers Race to the Top, it was very, very interesting. I came from higher education, and I just thought that Race to the Top was the greatest thing in the world, to be part of preparation programs and then to look at the possible reform efforts that were coming forward. But it was very complex, being in a state that really rejects the federal government to a large degree. So it was kind of an interesting time. And so in New Hampshire, the great thing about the state is that because we are small, we can collaborate. We only have 87 districts from right at the Canadian border, right down to Massachusetts, to Vermont and Maine, and we can collaborate. So that's a big, huge part of how we've been able to move forward and get the important work done as it relates to students. We are probably, I think, the second, I don't know if we're right next to both of you, in terms of dropout rate. Our governor, Governor Lynch, about 8 years ago now, decided that all students would stay in school through 18 years of age. There was tremendous resistance to that. But the good thing about New Hampshire is people do get the importance of students, and over that period of time we went, actually at one point we're first in the nation in terms of declining dropout rates. So in our department, collaboration is huge. We work very closely in the field with our superintendents. We work very closely with our teachers. And that has become the nuclei of the change process for us, reform. So we have 3 C's. We talk about collaboration, communication. It's a huge issue, even at a state as large as ours. Communicating where we want to go, working very closely with parents, and working closely with policymakers to say, how can we do this together and make sure that our state is viable? And the 3rd C is coherence. In New Hampshire, like most states, whatever reform efforts we try to put in place, they better make sense to people. So how we're able to communicate that becomes really, really essential. So what we do best is the collaboration piece and working together. Our emphasis, like Massachusetts, we are in our state economy. We are very concerned about the aging population in that we are not retaining young people of childbearing age. And so our business industry, our chambers, have worked very, very closely with the state to really put together an important relationship between education and the economy, and helping the general public to understand the importance of quality education and how people select to move into a state like New Hampshire, and how can we attract businesses. The partnership has been very, very helpful. We had tremendous dissent about the Common Core, and we've moved away from the Common Core title to New Hampshire College and Career Readiness, and we've worked very, very hard as a collaborative group looking at teacher evaluation. We'll probably talk about that a little bit later, but the teacher evaluation process that we developed involved a task force for 3 years. We did not go to high-stakes testing, and I agree with Secretary Malone. We are continuing to move away from every year summative testing. And we essentially have tried to get the public to look at assessment more as a tool to better understand developmentally where students are. So right now, I think those are really distinctive elements of where the state is.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Secretary Holcombe?
Yeah.
So I'm going to actually start with a story instead. Is there anyone here from Vermont who graduated? I'm so glad you're here. But I have to say, particularly for the younger people who look like they might be students, you're one of our best exports. And the other export that we have is maple syrup. And I want to tell you about a friend of mine who's a teacher in New York City. I got to turn this on. Is that better?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's great.
So I want to tell you about a friend of mine who's from Vermont and is a teacher, and she teaches in New York City. And last spring, she's a Vermonter and she grew up making maple syrup, she brought 3 boxes or buckets of sap down to her New York City classroom. And she, with her children, she helped them boil sap. And if you know, it takes about 40 gallons of sap to make a gallon of maple syrup. So she didn't make very much from 3 buckets. But I can only think of what it was like because it creates a lot of steam. And then about 2 weeks later, New York gave its new Common Core test. And take one guess what the reading prompt was about. It's about making maple syrup. And guess whose kids blew that test out of the park? And guess which teacher had the highest value-added score in that building? And
Wow.
someone asked her, what are you going to do next year to keep this up? She said, I'm going to boil sap in my classroom, except I have a funny feeling it won't be about maple sugaring next year. But I wanted to just throw that out there because I think Vermont is really at a tipping point, or a pivot point, if you will, because we are the only state in this group that is a non-waiver state. We chose not to apply for a Race to the Top grant because we don't believe education is about racing different schools competing, because we really believe that education is a public good, and we have to educate all our children well, because that's what ensures the economic and the civic vitality of our future. And so really we have tried to figure out how to grapple with that. We are now, I think in the TIMS, we come in behind Massachusetts in math and science, but we are also the only state in the country which, according to the federal government, every one of our schools is now considered a low-performing school. Even though our students, particularly our affluent students, not only outscore the nation, but are accelerating away. The one group that we consistently have not been satisfied with, so you're talking about us as states of success, and I think my problem is I tend to perseverate on what I think we should do better. And I'm really worried about what I see as this growing socioeconomic equity issue in our country, and that is what we see in Vermont. And as we test more, what we also do is lose some of the kids we need to reach the most. Because if we gave, for example, on the Smarter Balanced Assessment, a reading sample that was about automotive repair, I'm sure some of our young men, particularly our young men in poverty, might do much better than they would if they got, some other reading that wasn't so relevant. That's a reality. When I think of math assessments and I think of our ELLs, when you talk about cutting prices, I'm sure there's some children looking for the scissors who don't understand that that's a way that we talk about lowering prices. And they know the math, but they can't. It's a reading comprehension test. And I throw that out because the paradox is that we are using these tools for consequential purposes, but we don't always know what they're measuring, and they may not always be measuring what we say they're measuring. And the other thing is, when you think about the impact of telling kids 5 years in a row that you're not proficient, we don't just say level 1, level 2, level 3. We give it a normative value. We are telling kids that they don't measure up year after year. And what's the impact of that on children? It's something we have to think about. And there's been powerful research done in this state, in terms of the impact of failing the MCAS test on the probability you'll graduate. And it's different if you grow up in an urban context where you're living in poverty and you're a child of color than if you're in a suburban. There's an 8% greater probability that you'll drop out if you fail that test the first time. So something about the way we're using these tools, I feel, may be actually subverting our goal, which is high quality education for all students. I believe in equity, but I believe in using tests the same way we use the oil gauge on our car to check and monitor the quality of our system. But when we start to use them for high stakes consequential purposes, I am concerned that we may be distorting or incentivizing what we call education. So where does that leave Vermont? Well, in Vermont we say that you can weigh a pig 10 times, but that doesn't tell you how to make it fatter. What we're trying to do in Vermont is figure out how to put together a system that tells us how to make our pigs fatter. We want to know how to educate our children better, and the answer to that is not in those summative tests. So we are concerned, our primary goals are to address the socioeconomic inequities and to ensure high quality opportunities to learn for all of our children. We believe that we're not educating kids just to do well in tests, but we're educating them to thrive. And we believe that it's not that our teachers aren't wonderful, they are, but what we're asking our teachers to do is profoundly different from what they've been asked to do in the past. And that means our teachers need to learn to teach in new ways because of demographic transitions, because of greater ethnic diversity in the state, because of the advent of technology, which really changes what our goal is as schools and educators. We need to help them learn on the job to teach the children of today for a world we can't even imagine. That's a profound responsibility. We're also doing this at a time when what we're learning in, for example, neuroscience and brain research is telling us so much about what a teacher does. When you think about the fact that we now know that literally the opportunities to practice and the kinds of teaching you do shape the brain at the level of the neurons, that's an awesome responsibility. And we really need to take that learning and put it into practice in our schools. And think about what it means in a sensible way. And that's a big responsibility to give our kids. So how do we do that? How is Vermont approaching this? Well, we believe our biggest asset is our educators. And we also are as you described, the many school districts, and we believe in collaboration too. We actually have more than 3 times as many school districts as you do, even though we're much smaller. And so we really have a very, our state motto is liberty and union. The liberty part is people really make a lot of decisions at the local level. The union is that we have common goals. And so really my job at the agency is to try to help clarify what the goals are. And they're really broad. They're not just about learning in the tested subjects. We believe in learning across a broad spectrum of outcomes, including civics, which we know is, and science, which we know has suffered in the attention that we've paid to just the 2 heavily tested subjects under No Child Left Behind. But also the arts, creative abilities, social studies. We want children to be able to reason from evidence, to be able to make judgments, do what's essentially human work, be able to exercise judgment about complex problems that have no clear resolution. And to do that, we really need to engage our teachers both within schools and across schools in new ways, because we have to learn from each other. And if you think of very small schools, you may not have a peer at your level who's working with the same age children. And we need to encourage our teachers to leave their buildings in those situations and learn from others, to look at how people are doing things in different sites. So what we're doing, our theory of action, is if we can come up with clear goals that are broad and rich, and if we can provide supports for educators, and if we can have clarity around who's responsible for helping our children reach those goals, that we need to allow for tremendous flexibility at the local level in how you actually go about meeting those goals. And so, for example, we are moving towards a system of proficiency-based graduation, as I know others in this group are doing as well. Instead of going out and telling people and coming up with a script or a set of guidelines for how you implement that, we put out a series of implementation innovation grants where we invited school districts to send teams of teachers. Our only requirement was that you come to some initial training to get some common training and some technical design criteria that you had to work with, and then gave them grants to bring teams. They had to involve educators from every level in the system, have them come and grapple with that challenge, because we believe it's through that grappling that they will develop the expertise that they need to actually implement these ambitious goals that we have for our children. Yep.
There'll be lots of opportunities
Oh,
to develop the other parts. So, no, it's great. And I have to say, one key difference has already come out from these 3 presentations. And that maple syrup story is the best piece of state product placement I have ever
We're pretty good
witnessed
for skiing too.
on a discussion platform. So I can't wait to see as the evening unfolds what other products the other 2 states will be surreptitiously introducing into the, thank you very much, both of you, into the discussion. The way we're going to go now is the Boston College team here is going to lead on some questions. Not all 3 have to respond to all the questions, so we'll try and mix and match it a bit. And I'll start with a couple, if that's okay. We're of course, probably almost no one in the room would be upset or offended or disagree with you about an explicit return to the value of teachers and teaching and involving teachers and their associations in the reform, change and improvement process. And I think lots of people here will be delighted to see that you, along with a number of other jurisdictions in other parts of the world, are turning away from the excesses of testing to try and seek a sort of balance in assessment. But many of us know from the advisory work we do with organizations the size of whole states, that what people worry about if they lose a bit of the testing is that they'll lose public confidence in public education. So if if Secretary Duncan were to wake up, well, let's begin with that. If he were to wake up this week, if he were to wake up and say that he'd made a terrible mistake about testing and there should be no testing anywhere of a high-stakes nature in the United States, how else do you secure public confidence in public education in your states?
Yeah, well, New Hampshire is leading the country right now in competency-based education, and it's been through many iterations over the years, determining definition-wise proficiency, different names. So we're leading the way. It's a complex issue. We are a waiver state, and the reason that we've sought a waiver in our state for two reasons. One, we are looking at our priority schools. We have 224 Title I schools, struggling schools, and we also were looking to close the achievement gap. But we are also in the process of seeking a second waiver this year as we move into into 2015. And one of the waivers that we'll be seeking is to allow for differentiated assessment in the state. One of those is based on performance-based assessment. We'll be running a pilot for 4 large school districts to look at performance-based assessment. The way it's being communicated to the public is we're looking for and supporting competent and confident children. The terminology of whole child is a very much part of our state thinking. We want well-developed students on every level, including socio-emotional. And so that becomes a big part of it. We're also looking to move towards the SAT College Board at the 11th grade, the entire state. Not unlike Maine did probably almost 10 years ago now. It's been something that has been really important. So I think we will not see from the federal government a change of heart under Secretary Duncan. They have 2 years left to continue to support these reform efforts, but I think that the waiver process allows states to really modify and try to look at their own state demographics and reform efforts to improve education. And so the waivers have really, for many states, really served us well because it's given us greater freedom. But I do not think we're going to see a change in terms of summative assessment other than waivers.
Okay. Meanwhile, what are the other ways of securing public confidence as well as through changing the strategies towards assessments?
The other ways of doing that is, really I think New Hampshire, I wanted to set the context before because we are a different type of state. Every state, one of the things I've learned as commissioner is every single state is different. We all belong to an organization, a national organization of 51 commissioners in the country, 50 commissioners. And what you learn is every state has this very unique element of their culture and who they are. In our state, getting parents involved is really, really important. As I mentioned before, having young people really invest in their local schools. We are a local control state, and I really want to emphasize, I grew up in New York, where it's a very hierarchical state. The state says, do this, do that, you just do it. In New Hampshire, we have no authority. As commissioner, I have no authority over local control. They have to do, we can guide, we can support, but they will ultimately make all of their own decisions, all of them. And other than, we have a law that says you must participate in statewide assessment, and right now that's very controversial, and under the federal guidelines, you must participate if you accept federal dollars. So local control is a really interesting element of creating cultures within communities. But the way we're changing it is working with parents so that they see the value of a quality education. And a line that we always use is we're providing education to support children's future. It's their future. Helping to get people off of the way it was and looking about possibly the way it will be in the future for their success.
Thank you. That's great. Really gets the discussion going. Now I want to follow up with a question. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Two points of view will be good.
This issue of public confidence in public education is, well, we do that just for the reputations and the marketing we do at our schools, but if we were doing a poor job, why is the cheapest house in Newton $900,000? I mean, think about everyone wants to move to Massachusetts to go to the public schools. It's one of our strengths. Our greatest export is a state. You talked about marketing maple syrup. I'm going to market brain power. It's as important to Massachusetts as our governor likes to say, corn is to wherever corn comes from and oil is to Texas. right? Iowa, right? I mean, so, we don't have the natural resources other than the people that we have. That's what makes our state so amazing. In these states as well, and no disrespect, I love your states. And I like the fact that you guys are talking assessment as well. But, when we think about, I will say this to you, a month ago, Arnie Duncan and President Obama did both say that I think we are assessing too much. They both said it. Arnie said it through a communique that he sent out to teachers, and then the president said it at an address following
Yeah,
that.
I did.
I'm not anti-assessment. I don't think anyone in this, I don't know. I'm not anti-assessment.
You'll have a chance.
Right? What I'm anti is too much assessment. We just did an analysis a week ago. Brockton Public Schools does 65 days out of a 180-day calendar. 65 days of those are spent on some sort of state summative assessment. Now, that's a little too much, don't you think? This idea of every grade, it doesn't make sense to me. I have a third grader and a sixth grader, and I'm already seeing what the stress and all that stuff are going on. let's make decisions based on kids' stress. What I'm saying is perhaps a balance is every other year, and perhaps it's just in math and English, or that we skip a year and do one of the sciences, and I'm not even talking social studies yet. But for us to be thoughtful and practical at this solution, we've doubled down rather than saying, let's be more strategic. If less could possibly be more, don't you think the results would better help us actually inform our theory of action in some way and our delivery strategy? These are things that I know our Board of Education, as we speak right now in a retreat, is talking about. And it's refreshing, because the field's been talking about it a long time. And when the folks that make decisions don't listen in the field, you have problems.
Okay, so this is great
Not going to let me
Just-
answer that?
Yes, we have
Okay,
to.
go on. For the first question, all three get to answer. Okay.
Yes.
And probably for every question,
For all
I
the
would think as well.
questions.
And you're staying till 10, didn't I tell you that? So I have to say, I agree with you about the performance-based assessments. I have to say in Vermont, these tests don't have credibility, because people look at our state and they say, how can every school be a low-performing, failing school? What we're going to do is we're going to invite legislators, and we're going to invite newspaper reporters to sit down and take the Smarter Balanced Assessment with our kids. Because when we see that they fail in comparable numbers to our students, I think that will be instructive about what these tests really measure. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you think you could give me an informal explanation of what Cavalieri's principle is. Anyone? I go around the state with a piece of chocolate offering the Cavalieri's principle. It's one of this. Can anyone do that?
Cavalier.
I see one hand. It's one of the 10th grade Common Core standards that will be tested. And this is what we're asking our kids to do. And I think people understand that these tests may not be capturing everything that's in
Well, aren't you going to tell us the answer?
No,
You're
you look it
supposed
up.
to know.
You're supposed to know. You're a professor of education. I do believe in tests, but I think when we use tests the way we're using them, we actually even erode the value of them for the purpose for which they were intended. My daughter actually went to school in Newton, and one of the reasons we were happy to go back to Vermont, frankly, is because they were using released forms of the test every day to practice for the MCAS. And I've seen the research that shows you in some of the states, not in Massachusetts, but in some states, you see these astronomical gains on the state tests, and they're not matched on NAEP. And what that tells you is we're learning things in school that matter for test taking, but they may not actually be useful to our children when they leave school and go out into the real world. And that's a tragedy, because what we're doing is we're masking an equity gap, and that the people who will be most adversely affected are the people who really need that broad experience and that broad learning the most.
So it's great to see 3 states taking a lead in this particular area, and I think many people will feel very positive about what all of you have been saying. High-performing countries some of them are beginning to learn from and collaborate with each other, not only at the level of policy, but also school to school, teacher to teacher, and so on. So in the room with us this evening amongst the guests is Professor Pasi Sahlberg from, now at Harvard, from Finland. And Pasi and our colleague, Professor Dennis Shirley here, are involved in a partnership where schools exchange and visit each other, between Alberta in Canada and Finland. And one of the many things they picked up, the people in Alberta said what they learned from Finland is some really good things about vocational education. And the schools in Finland said they learned a lot from Canada about the importance of extracurricular activities. So it may already have happened, but if kids in high school kids and their teachers in your state were to be visited by teachers from one of your neighboring states, what distinctively do you think your neighboring states' schools might learn from you? And if you have any comments vice versa, that will be interesting too. So what would they pick up that is really kind of special, do you think?
I can say one of the things I think we can learn from Massachusetts is that that teaching is no longer ad hoc, and I think one of the things that teachers in Vermont are working on is being more systematic in looking diagnostically at children. And if you aren't systematic, you can't go out and be a free bird teacher, because if you are, you may lose the children who need the support the most. And I think that sort of systems approach is something that we can learn from. We actually collaborate quite a bit with New Hampshire. I think we actually have more in common than different, but I know that the partnerships around performance-based assessments and proficiency-based learning have been incredibly valuable to us in terms of learning.
So what we learned from Massachusetts, not that we don't learn something from Vermont, we do, because we do partner, but one thing is the wonderful way that Massachusetts businesses support public education. And we've done a lot of research on that work, and it really has helped the state move forward. It's enormous that, I read a lot of the Boston papers, the media is much more positive. The public is very invested in public education in Massachusetts, and that would be something I would love to transfer across the state lines, because that work that's been done over the years to develop those partnerships has really created a state that's moving and keeps moving forward.
If students from any of these two states came into some of our schools, I think what they would find perhaps new and exciting is a lot of the work that we're doing with blended learning, a lot of the work that we're doing with STEAM, and that full integration so that arts is fully integrated into what we see as the hands-on project-based world. And they would probably, in some areas, be impressed by what some innovative places are doing with the senior year. So, for example, what Needham High School is doing with their Greater Boston project. I think other states' children would also be impressed with the actual pathways we've built to community colleges in 4 years, and how those are seamless, stackable, and meaningful in many ways. And then finally, I think that folks in these two states would be interested, perhaps, learning is what we're trying to do in early childhood, or how we're trying to backwards map off 9-year-olds to get to 0, and figure out how we get kids earlier with really all the wraparound services. And I will say this to you guys. In many ways, the work that you're doing in your states, particularly in your very rural components, is the hardest work we do as a nation. And I've visited in Massachusetts. I'm an inner city guy. I've always been an urban educator. When you think about how hard it is to break the cycle of rural poverty, and that at the end of the day, education is the break point. And I know that in many of our border areas, Orange, Mass, Templeton, Royalston, Heath, Coleraine, and all those, Ernest, all those, we have some challenges that we could share, I think.
Definitely. Well, you have segued actually perfectly into my question, because one of the things I wanted to ask the panel is about early childhood education. We know that across the nation we're seeing now an emphasis in the early years and how early childhood can prepare students, young children, promoting social and academic skills. So I wanted to ask you about this expansion that we're seeing for services for young children, And my question is, how do you expand access to early childhood education programs while assuring high-quality services?
Don't rush it. Yeah. Vermont actually passed new legislation last spring that will guarantee access to high-quality early childhood education for all children in the state of Vermont, all 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who aren't yet old enough to go to kindergarten. And we're really excited about that. We really see that as a critical next area of work. To support quality, we realize that we need to have a solid foundation in terms of rules and processes to support it before we begin the implementation. We also need to, and we have worked very, very actively with our private partners, both in the philanthropic world, but also with businesses and private providers, to support professional development and training to support high quality. And we're fortunate enough to receive some money from the federal government to support standards setting.
And how long do you think it will take to implement the universal pre-K?
Well, we will be fully implemented by not this coming year, but the following year.
The following year. Fantastic. Thoughts on early childhood quality?
Yeah, in New Hampshire, again, we do not have universal pre-K. It's still, very, very controversial in our state. But one of the great things is our school districts have really started to take their federal money to be able to work very closely with child care environments. There's a strong emphasis on quality child care for all children. So we work very closely with all of our business partners in the area that provide child care, and our doors are open. The actual focus is on early literacy, early development, and I think that's had a major impact on our state as we begin to look at new policy. And so early childhood is a huge part of everyone's thinking today in our state.
One of the things I'm most proud of is that we were able to establish legislation last year where we uncapped the ability to service 4-year-olds in our Chapter 70 funding formula. So now local systems can fill as many seats as they want with 4-year-olds, which will help us, get a wait list reduction is clearly one of our goals. We've got 17,000 kids on the wait list for access to early education from 0 to 5. We took 3,000 off last year, another 2,500 off this year. The governor put forward a bold proposal a year ago that was not supported to get to universal access, get all the kids off the wait list, but the cost was about $1 billion, and we did not support that. We supported it, but the House and the Senate didn't support it. I will say this to you, I strongly support and hope that we start talking about in state law, looking at 5 is the new 6 and 4 is the new 5. I want to see kindergarten start at least 4, and I want, what do we call it, the compulsory ed to start at 5 rather than 6, so that we have at least every kid in the Commonwealth at 5 has access to a full day free kindergarten program. I think that the work, as I've said and I'll say it again, there is no more work more important than early childhood work right now, and if you do not understand that, just come spend some time with one of us, seeing the things that we see on a daily basis. We cannot talk about, we cannot celebrate any successes without saying, well, we still have a lot more work to do in early childhood, and it's really going to take about investment and communication and telling people about what the importance is. And let's just get it straight. Unstructured playtime is critically important. And people talk a lot of trash about why are we going to pay for that. But to me, where do we learn about everything? Unstructured playtime. And enrichment, when do we do that? Right? What country learned from, I guess Canadians do, you just said, enrichment well, perhaps. This whole idea of kids that come from privilege have access to things that kids that live in poverty don't, and we're only going to get those kids understanding the whole world when we invest in all of their unstructured enrichment time as well, so that school becomes 12 months, not 12 months of school, but it's 12 months of something. It just looks very different.
Fantastic, yeah.
So it's kind of the forward-thinking stuff. But.
Great. Play for learning, we call it in the early childhood courses that I teach, and I saw my students nodding, yes, thank you for being here.
When do we do recess until? Like we stop it at 5th grade. I need recess now, right? I mean, I think everyone in the world does. So, I mean, you think about, right, well, right.
Well, thank you for your responses. Henry?
Well, thank you, yes, and let me just follow up a little bit on this issue. but take it a little more broadly. As you know, many people feel that some of the issues we have around education are not solely the province of departments of education, that children bring with them many problems. They develop issues. They could be psychological issues, medical issues, dental issues, so on. And unfortunately, many children today do not have access to the kinds of extra school services that remove barriers to learning. What are you doing in your state in terms of trying to bring partnerships among different state agencies to provide the kind of wraparound services that might support academic learning above and beyond what you do in the school, whether it's unstructured or structured?
Our governor established something called the Readiness Cabinet several years ago. The Readiness Cabinet is all of the state agencies that have some sort of touch point with young people to ensure readiness is a term that we use for schooling and for learning and for life. So we have a very robust cabinet that's gone deep in Worcester, Springfield, Holyoke, started in Boston and looking to expand in Bedford. We're trying to figure out to create these zones, if you will, these wraparound zones to do this work. That prior secretary, Paul Revels, came up with this idea, and he took it to Harvard. Now Harvard has a center for readiness, and it's great to have a hothouse, if you will, a R&D on this concept. But when you think about public-private partnership, it's the extended learning time stuff, it's the enrichment academies, it's work that we're doing for English language learners and career academies. To think about weekends, vacations, and summertime very differently, and that there's a ton of room for public-private partnership in this zone, so that summers are productive times when kids are in camp. If kids aren't in camp and they're not doing anything, that their parents are keeping a finger on them for reading, there's the backsliding. And how do we address that as a state, I think, is through this concept of investment in specific zone areas, couple it with a partnership with private providers, and ensure we fund recesses to spur innovation for local systems to apply to.
Yeah, in New Hampshire, we have had 2 consecutive great governors that have been really, really focused. I mentioned before that we're leading the country in competency-based, but we define the competency-based as it relates to whole children. So all of our agencies, I work very, very closely with not only Health and Human Services, those agencies, but the Department of Justice. There's a very strong focus on students not being part of the correction system, working very hard, starting at very young age, early childhood, to address any kinds of socio-emotional deficits that a child may be experiencing at home, dysfunction, and so on and so forth. So there is an expectation in every school district for wraparound services, that they partner with agencies that can provide the kind of support that parents need, particularly young parents, to be able to deal with the complexities of economics and various other kinds of things. So that's a very strong focus in New Hampshire, which goes back to my original point about collaboration. There is that expectation that we are collaborating to provide the kind of quality education that's beyond just a classroom environment, but a whole environment.
That we work very, very closely with the Agency of Human Services in Vermont in particular. So, for example, we now have universal pay. That is the fruit of a joint effort with our Agency of Human Services and private providers. And it really is about 0 to 3, grade 3, not age 3, 0 to age 3. And there's a series of initiatives, everything from early learning supporting social and emotional development to parents as the first teachers of their children, trying to find ways to do that, and a series of initiatives to link parents to services and to provide sort of wraparound care in terms of child care, sort of appendages to the universally funded pre-K, so that parents who really need to work can have full day care. So that's one example. We also work with a nonprofit organization to extended day. So we would love to give after school to everybody and summer learning to everybody for all the reasons you described, and we're working with partners to.
Okay, thank you. It's very heartening, actually, to hear this. Let me change gears here for a bit. As you know, there's widespread concern about the quality of teaching in this country. Not in these states, but in general. And NCTQ has gotten a lot of publicity and gotten a lot of mileage out of their criticisms of teacher preparation programs. Now, following the lead of states like Louisiana and Tennessee, the federal government has declared, though it's not yet law, that they would like to see a new approach to evaluating teacher preparation programs that would include test-based indicators based on the students of novice teachers and somehow aggregating back to the teacher preparation programs. What's your opinion of this approach, and what would be your counter proposal to the federal government about trying to change or perhaps improve the nature of the evaluation that teacher preparation programs undergo?
So I'll answer that because
Please.
I'm particularly proud of what's going on in New Hampshire. When reform efforts were starting, we, right from the very first day, involved all of our preparation programs in the state. And did not go into a leveraged punitive model, but said, basically communicated to our preparation, both at the teacher and leader level, that they had an enormous responsibility to be part of this change process. So you can imagine there was some grumblings, and it was sort of like, well, we think about academic freedom coming from higher ed, it was sort of like, why would the state be involved in the preparation programs? But an amazing thing really happened. We changed enormous policies in our state. We have a Council of Teacher Education. All public and private institutions now have a seat. We changed our charters. We have a professional standards boards. We looked at all of the national standards for both teachers and leaders. We got full investment from our teachers unions, NEA and AFT. They are all at the table involved. Along with that is a very strong focus of selectivity of students into the preparation programs at both levels, and also alignment with state priorities, because one of the things, feedback from our superintendents is many students graduate without data literacy. They don't have a deep understanding of child development. They don't understand wraparound services. They don't understand what's going on. And so I'm very pleased to say that all of our public and private institutions in our state that certify teachers came to our State Board of Education in writing and proposed their commitment to preparation programs. And it's a very positive model, and they have taken enormous responsibility, including a movement towards changing tenure rules where those faculty members in the preparation programs would work alongside the state, looking at data, doing and conducting research, and so on and so forth. So that's been a huge emphasis. It took the pressure and spread it across everybody, that everyone had an ultimate responsibility to be sure we have the best teachers in our schools, in all of our schools. And so equity became really part of a large conversation in our state, that every school district, regardless of socioeconomic status, deserves the best teachers. And that's been, I would say, one of the most progressive, really collaborative efforts our state has taken on, and it's been enormously positive for the public to see the university system to be very committed.
On Massachusetts, awesome stuff. At the higher ed level, because Massachusetts secretary has all the 29 public campuses underneath us, teacher prep programs. And that, to me, is our greatest strength. The teacher prep programs are at the table with the K-12 stuff to understand in the early childhood. But what's frustrating, look, I love you guys, and BC puts out the best teachers in the world. They truly do. But we have to figure out how the ed schools pre-service are graduating everyone with all the stuff that we're making everyone else do right now. So they're graduating retail trained, that they are showing up with a clear understanding around what the differentiated learning looks like, what it means to be part of a data team and use assessment. All of those pieces. And it's not for me so much as a regulatory function. It's really a function of I think it's really a function of the open market. I like to see schools and providing more innovation, so that BC, having the greatest teachers in the world, but UMass Boston also saying, well, we can do as well is building their own programs to have all those things. I don't know if I'm a big fan about looking at student achievement results and saying we're going to hold you accountable, hold your school on that, but there's probably metrics that those could be coupled with, and maybe we could have a host of metrics to be able to do. There's a problem with using student achievement data always. We do a disservice to incentivizing people working with our toughest populations. Because they're always going to score lower. And then we have a problem with like alt ed, and we have a problem with dropout recovery, and places where we want people to go in and do the work. Look, the work in Brockton is great, right? I'm the only superintendent in the state that doesn't have a level 4 school. And the achievement's going through the roof. But when you just look at achievement, not coupled with growth, the achievement is not as, as good as other places. And we want to attract teachers to work in those places. And if we're tying their prep to some other score and then tying it back, I think that probably will disincentivize, if you will, our best and brightest going into those. Because let me just say this last one I'm going to say on this topic. We're out talking to high school kids 3 days a week out in the field. And what scares the hell out of me is when I ask folks what they want to do, not one hand goes up to be a teacher. Maybe one. That's frustrating to me because it's the greatest job in the world once you get into it and understand it. And we need, all of us and everyone in this room, we need to find a way to market our profession in a way that brings honor back to the work and makes it the true calling that it's supposed to be, so that this isn't about a paycheck and about getting scored. It's about service, and that service and calling, and I talked about this at BC before, why we do. So we run to work because we love the job, and we incentivize it by creating these amazing places where people want to work rather than beating people down because of some X factor that didn't happen. So that to me is really kind of the next 10 years. I think we're going to have some hard talks about this as a nation, figuring out how we can make this the place, why some of these other nations you guys study, the people that go into the field, these are the best and the brightest in the whole nation that go to these, that go in this, because it's an honorable profession. We need to bring the honor back to it.
So in a way, if I could follow up, let's play with the idea for a second. One way of moving on from what you're saying is to say that at the bottom, with low performers, turnaround strategies focus a lot on really more shackles, more constraints, more intervention, more monitoring, more accountability. Are you suggesting in a way that to attract really good teachers and leaders to work there for some period of time, it might actually be desirable to take the shackles off rather than put the shackles on?
Level 3 bill that was proposed last year, the Level 3 charter bill that didn't get passed, included exactly what you're talking about. And when I was superintendent and some other superintendents led the development of that bill. And what that looks like is something called site-level redesign, to empower teams and incentivize them in the field before you get taken over and get the, it goes back to Elmore's tight, loose coupling, right? Accountability, I'm not afraid of. I'll take it all. But what we need to do is empower and inspire people to site level to make the changes needed around the conditions of schooling, create a catalyst for a year's worth of growth, or more than a year's growth in a year's time. We have places that are showing that. And it's not just the turnaround districts, which is high prescription, but even in Lawrence there's been freedom and flexibilities. And those folks have run with it. And when they do run with it, I think we get greater results. So it's not one or the other. It's kind of thinking about how we can blend the two.
I get the last question, unless you wanted to comment on.
Someone who used to work in a teacher ed program, I think one of the things I've struggled with is what makes good teachers is not just that you've taken courses and you know how to use data. You have to have a passion for your subject. If you're teaching at the secondary level, you have to have deep knowledge in your subject, and you have to have deep knowledge about how to teach that subject. And those are not things you develop in an instant. And frankly, as a former first-year teacher, I will tell you we're all terrible our first couple years. I don't believe anyone who says they were brilliant their first year. Some people are more efficient at teaching to a test their first year than others. But we have to have a long-term vision for how we develop educators, and it has to go, thank you to those of you who develop teachers, but it doesn't end when you graduate and move on.
Agreed.
And I have to second what you're saying. And I wish we were a truly integrated nation. We're not. We're actually more segregated now than we were, I think, pre-civil rights. And that has at least we certainly are in Vermont, that has profound implications for our teachers. And if these tests are still grade level tests, so if your students are performing more than 2 grade levels below that test, even if you get tremendous gains, it won't even show up on that test. And that's even assuming that people aren't narrowing instruction to the test in ways that introduce other equity gaps. So we have to be very careful because we can't punish programs for sending our most qualified teachers where they need to go the best. And we also can't put so many restrictions and so many burdens on teachers who are entering the field that they say, forget it. At Dartmouth, our problem was that the math that students, for example, had to demonstrate to get certification was math they did in high school. So it was so burdensome to demonstrate it that they just said, forget it, and I'll go to TFA. The problem with that is you enter the classroom then with no preparation, and you burn out, and you're gone in 2 years. And as an educator, as a principal, I knew I couldn't afford that kind of turnover because it took me more than 2 years to get those teachers to a level of competence. And I couldn't afford to have people come in who couldn't survive.
Definitely. Excellent. Excellent points. For the last question, I like to talk about English language learners or bilingual students. And I was thinking about exactly what to ask in this context because I had 10 questions, but I get only to ask one. So, of course, you know, we have been focusing on English language learners for some time now because of the incredible demographic change. We have seen an increase in the students across the nation. And we're also focusing on these students because we have evidence that is showing an academic achievement gap between ELLs and non-ELLs. I also like to talk about an opportunity gap because sometimes English language learners don't get the same opportunities to learn than other students get. And so I wanted to ask you, what has been the biggest challenge in reducing the academic achievement and opportunity gaps between English language learners and non-ELL students in your state? Biggest challenge?
I think in New Hampshire, the biggest challenge is really the diversity that families bring to communities. New Hampshire is 95% Caucasian, and so we have a 5% group of students that are English language learners. They're very, very diverse. They come from countries that the language itself is a real challenge for teachers. So I think that's our biggest challenge, is really enculturating people into communities and providing them the support that they need to be successful in school. So I think our state is very different than Massachusetts in that respect.
Recently I heard you had 100 languages represented.
Yeah, we have 100 languages in New Hampshire, several African countries, and for a state where it's so small, it's a very, very concentrated community, particularly in the city of Manchester, and we're really struggling. We really are. We haven't mentioned critical shortage areas. Like most states, our critical shortage area are those students that major in global languages so that we can have the access points. We do rely on our local hospitals to be able to do evaluations of students. We often have students that don't have birth certificates. We lack information when they come into the country. So I would say we struggle with it, and we need more expertise in our state to be able to deal better. But the students are a great focus in those communities to make sure that they become quickly enculturated so that they get the support they need.
So, I mean, this is the greatest challenge we face as a nation right now.
One of them?
Well, but it probably is the most important when we think about our industry. This is a political issue on both sides of the fence. But for me, I think that where we've failed is that we don't have a solid enough definition yet of what good practice is. We have, 30 different ways to do it without the top 3 ways. So, I'm the former assistant, one of 50 superintendents in the city of San Diego, 147,000 kids on the Tijuana border, Mexico, and we still don't have an answer of what is the best methodology to engage. I think PSYOP offers probably strong promise, but I like the dual immersion model. It's just costly, and we got places that You know, I have dual immersion schools in many different communities across Massachusetts that are doing great work, and I'd like to perhaps see more of those. We also know the additional time is needed, so I think we have promise and potential with our, what we call our English language learner academies, which are funded through our office during that summer and winter and school vacation time to provide additional supports. But we are definitely struggling with, you know, every single day. It's more and more kids at the student registration centers. My time in Brockton alone, we went from 15,000 kids to 17,000 in 4 years. That's a growth of 2,000 students. I mean, that's bigger than half the school systems in Massachusetts. And that's just in 4 years' time. And most of those students are second language learners. And what is it? It's not even, it's really a good thing, but forcing us to really reshape our systems to create a welcoming sense. I mean, for many folks that are new to this country, our schools are the first touch point that they've ever had with the face of government. So that means we have to be good stewards. And what does it mean to be welcoming, to have the language able to translate, to ensure that we're taking kids in now and doing all the other things that we have to do? I mean, you and I just visited a place that does it well in the middle of, Jamaica Plain at the Nursery.
Yes.
Early, if you guys haven't, go visit the Nursery Early Learning Center and Bromley Heath Housing Project and see what they're doing with Children's Hospital as a partner in this work in their health center. And we have to, if we don't get this right, we're gonna have, the gaps are gonna grow, the economy will falter, and morally will have failed our mission.
Yes, no, but it's true. It's about the future of the nation. And I'm glad you mentioned the two-way programs because I think they're promising, costly, and they require teacher training that perhaps we're not completely offering right now. We're just started offering the teacher training for those programs. One couple of last words, and I think we'll then turn it to the Q&A. Yes.
So everything you said, which is good. The other thing I would say is that we also have, I'm mindful of Gary Orfield's recent Civil Rights Project release.
Definitely.
And I really think we need to hear the optimism in that too, and certainly for states with declining populations who are really struggling to find workers, to me this is a tremendous opportunity for us. And we really are seeing that the increasing numbers of students from different backgrounds and different countries is really very positive. It has also helped us to look at ourselves from the outside in a way that we might not have done. And there are certain partnerships, particularly in the Burlington-Winooski area, north in the state, more urban, where new American families have helped us understand the illogic of some of our systems and help us figure out how to translate them in a way that makes sense, not just for English language learners and new Americans, but also for children living in poverty, children whose parents didn't go to college, all kinds of other things in terms of how you make that transition. The challenge that we have that is a little unique is that because many of our schools are so small and so rural, we have different issues associated with very low incidence, and this is something we also struggle with disabilities. That there may be one child in a school who is an English language learner, and that's very challenging. It's very, very challenging to try to support that, particularly in the absence of sufficiently trained staff. And heaven forbid that child also has a disability, because it's very difficult to find a special educator who also has training in English language learners, who can help us disentangle what those challenges are.
Indeed, really important. So we have left some time for audience questions. Let's see. We could take 2 questions maybe with the time we have left. How are we doing on time, Megina? 0 time. No, let's take a couple of questions and then we'll have ending remarks. We have a cocktail reception waiting for us. So if your questions are brief and quick, then we can just move over there. Yes, question from the audience.
I very much appreciate the comments that you made, and in trying to secure the public's confidence in education, I wondered if...
A microphone there if you like.
In trying to secure the public's confidence in education, I wondered if each of the speakers could just comment briefly on whether their job might be easier or more difficult if they were elected chief state school officers. I worked at one point in time with an elected chief state school officer. He was fairly candid about his statements. He didn't walk into the State House with his hat in his hand on budget because he was elected with a higher number of votes than anybody else in the state. So he was candid about what he wanted and needed. And I just wondered whether we haven't, since education from a constitutional point of view is a 10th Amendment delegation of responsibility to the states, I'm wondering if the chief state school officer were a position that was voted on, whether the vote and the public's interest might not be more directly expressed, number one, and number two, whether people with the sophistication and training and background that you folks have wouldn't find it easier to operate from that position than from the position of a nominee.
Or to put it a little mischievously, is it better to be elected or to be appointed by those who've been elected?
Right. I cannot imagine what it's like for chief school officers that go through an election process. I really believe, I think it's a great question. I've thought about this a lot in the last 6 years. I believe to be student-centered, to be worried about families and children, to go through an election process. People that take these positions need to be incredibly knowledgeable. They have to be incredibly focused. They have to have a vision that relates to the state goals. And to go through an election process, I think, really would drive you away from what's really important for children. And I've watched states where commissioners, secretaries come and go because they go through an election process. And they lose ground. They lose ground. And if it's really about children, if it's really about their future, then I think the time that you would spend on trying to convince people that you're the right person would drive you away from what's really important. So I actually, my heart goes out for every commissioner in this state that is forced to go through an election process, because there's absolutely no guarantee that the people doing and participating in the election process understand the needs of children and public education. And I mean that really seriously.
I have to say, one of the most sobering things about going to the conferences that you pointed out was how short the tenure is of secretaries. And you're actually, I think, one of the more senior people at this point with 6 years.
Right.
And that should give us all pause, because schools need stability. They can make changes, but they need stability. I don't think it's an accident that you're finally really realizing the fruit of some of what you've worked on, because it takes you that long to get there. And so I really worry about that kind of instability at the top and what that does to the system as well. And I think we have to look to build public faith through our work. One of the reasons we're developing school quality reviews is because the testing isn't doing it. So we're going to try to have a more robust way to provide communities with qualitative and quantitative feedback that they can use to evaluate the quality of what they're doing. I think the work and the student learning will speak for itself, but I think politicizing it in that way makes it very difficult for us to
I want to make one more point, because I think it is important. I represent my governor, and my governor represents the vote of the people. And it would be an expectation that her goals, her vision, would be represented in all of the divisions of the state agencies. We support our governor, and the people supported our governor. And I think that's a very important concept for people to remember when we talk about these jobs that we have, because when we talk about teachers and the support they need in our universities and our future of this country and technology and everything else like that, if it keeps changing, we just keep losing ground. And so that consistency, I agree with Rebecca, consistency is really critical. And that assumes the person has the ability to do it. So I think there has to be a balance in it.
And also the kind of interagency collaboration we talked about would be much more challenging if we were each independently elected. There wouldn't be that incentive to collaborate.
Thank you. So if the three leaders now will each have 3 minutes to make a closing statement at the end of
Which could
this
be a
session.
minute, really.
Yeah, so it's three
I'll do a
existential. It should I don't know whether it should feel like 3 and be 1 or feel like 1 and be 3, but three tight minutes. And for those of you who do have burning questions, at cocktail afterwards, I know that all 3 of you are staying behind.
Child left behind.
You are. Okay. Okay, good. So no commissioner, no secretary left behind. So there'll be lots of opportunity over cocktails to ask more questions. And could we ask you then in this order, Rebecca, could you be the first to make some concluding remarks?
Well, mine will be short because I didn't prepare a closing statement. I think I misread my email. I'm sorry. I just want to say I don't think there's any public trust more important than educating our children. And it is the most complicated, it is the hardest thing I know I've ever done as a teacher. People often ask me if my job is challenging. Challenging as that of a teacher in the classroom. And having worked now as a teacher, as a building leader, as a district leader, as an educator of principals, as an educator of teachers, what I come away with again is that it's not about individual efforts, it's really about educators at every level of the system working together to build their understanding, their expertise, and their ability to collaborate across systems and across grade levels. And what concerns me so much about the policy environment that we're in right now is I think it pitches teaching as something that's a simple task that anyone can do. I think the way we recognize and we measure progress often erodes deeper learning, often erodes some of the breadth and depth of what we know constitutes a well-educated human being. And I think it sometimes masks some of the inequities that we know are there. I think that one of the biggest challenges we have is around socioeconomic inequities. I know Vermont has a very progressive, the most progressive funding formula in the country, and it is not enough. We cannot, these achievement gaps that we see, these happen outside. 2/3 of them are explained by learning outside of school. And I think if we really care about this, we have to ask ourselves what we're really willing to do. How much do we really care about equity, and are we really willing to put our effort at building the professional capital we need in our educators and providing the support for children that they need to be able to achieve our goals for them. And at the end of the day, there's no other excuse but rolling up our sleeves, putting our money where our mouth is, and doing the hard work. We cannot test our way to Finland, is what we say in Vermont. That is not how we're going to do it because there is no shortcut. It's incredibly complex, hard work that requires collaboration, not just within schools, but across agencies and across schools. And I hope you'll enjoy and support me in that. And if you're interested in coming to Vermont, let me know. We can use some good teachers.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Matt?
My closing comments. Guy in the back whose phone went off. Aside from my mother's that went off too. This is my mother right here for everyone.
I knew that was your mother.
That is my mother.
I knew it.
But that was Jay Giles, wasn't it? No, the guy, right? So, yeah, yours wasn't. Yours was a robot. Listen, here's my closing comments. My closing comments is simple. Why are charter schools so successful? They're nimble. They're a unit of one. And we need to think very differently about systems in schools to create the same conditions. Independent schools are awesome because they are also units of one. Vocational high schools that are regional are units of one and getting great results. Places that are one-room schoolhouses and doing Montessori models, again, units of one. What's the lever of change? The lever of change is the site. The classroom is the place where the work happens, so we need to think about this strategy of site-level redesign and empowering our school levels, our individual schools with freedoms and flexibilities to do and try on new things so that the bureaucracy of the system doesn't swallow them up. That's how we will continue to get great results in Massachusetts. And at the end of the day, as I said when I started, we pat ourselves on the back all the time about our results, but it's not good enough. And it's great to pat ourselves on the back, but really, again, it comes down to the types of values that we instill in our young people, the type of opportunities and love and empathy that we teach, and that's what really makes, for us, an outstanding educational state to raise a child.
That's great. That's really good. I'll be very quick. If you get a chance, you can go online to the New Hampshire Department of Education, and there's we actually sort of replicated what the New York Times did. We did an interactive story of the transformation in our state in terms of public education. And I think you'd find it very, very valuable because it sort of ties it up, but it mostly emphasizes that in a democracy, public education is absolutely essential for success of a nation. And I think it kind of puts together all the comments that have been made tonight. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's,
Well, bravo, one and all, and I know I'm standing between all of you and the reception, but I would just like to thank the secretaries and commissioner for being here today, for your fascinating remarks, and again, for the faculty and staff who coordinated this. I am very glad that this is on front row so that people who aren't here today will have an opportunity to listen to the remarks because many important points were made here. At the Lynch School, one of our great exports is our teachers. We educate people, many who are teachers in Boston and throughout the Commonwealth, but also throughout New England and throughout the nation. So I think that many of the points that I heard today made me feel very good about the work that we do here. But I also think that this dialogue from the world of practice is very important for us in informing us of things that we need to think about to do an even better job and to prepare our students for the field and to be the future leaders. So thank you very much. You've done a great service to all of us.
one more time. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you very
Well done.
much.
Thank you. That's good. Did you enjoy that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Did you enjoy that? Yeah, I mean, you really did, I could tell.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
That's great. That's a